Ethan McGraw was the kind of man folks in town tipped their hats to, though few could claim to really know him. He had built his ranch with his own hands, fencing the wide pastures and raising strong horses that were prized across the territory. His days began before dawn, when the sky was still a stretch of gray over the prairie. By lantern light he saddled his best gelding, checked the herd, and set to work as the sun rose in a blaze of fire. The work was grueling but steady, the kind that left a man with sore muscles and a quiet pride. Ethan preferred it that way. The ranch didn't ask questions, didn't pry into his past, and never pressed him for what he wasn't willing to give. Townsfolk often remarked that he was reliable to the bone but also aloof as a winter wind. Whenever talk turned to marriage, usually when some mother with a hopeful daughter was nearby, Ethan would smile politely and excuse himself. He carried an old vow, etched deep by heartbreak, that he would never bind his life to another's again. His companions were the ones who never asked more of him than he could give. The horses grazing in the golden grass, and the quiet that stretched across the prairie like a blanket. In the evenings, he'd sit on the porch, the dog at his feet, listening to the distant howl of coyotes. And yet, even as he convinced himself this was the life he wanted, there were nights when the silence pressed too hard against his chest. The ranch was full of life, but empty of voices. Ethan told himself solitude made him stronger, but sometimes, when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, he wasn't so sure. The prairie dusk had settled heavy, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and violet, when Ethan McGraw led his horse back toward the stable. His shoulders ached from the day's ride, the kind of weariness that usually made him crave nothing more than a warm meal and silence. But tonight, the silence was broken in the most unexpected way. As he pushed open the stable doors, the lantern light fell across a sight that made him freeze. There, curled awkwardly in the saddle he'd left hanging across the rail, was a young woman fast asleep. Her cloak was threadbare, its edges frayed like it had weathered miles of dust and rain. Stray locks of tangled hair spilled over her face, while the pale curve of her cheek bore the marks of exhaustion. Her dress was simple but travel-worn, and her boots were scuffed near to ruin. Ethan's brow furrowed. Strangers didn't simply appear on his ranch, let alone sleeping in his tack. For a long moment he just stared, unsure whether to shake her awake or leave her be. Finally, he reached out and touched her shoulder lightly. She startled at once, eyes flying open wide with fear. "Please," she gasped, drawing back as though expecting a blow. I'm sorry. I just needed somewhere to rest. I'll leave if you want me to." Her voice was hoarse, the words rushed, yet there was something in them that cut deeper than apology. Ethan narrowed his eyes, measuring the tremor in her tone against the honesty he thought he heard beneath it. "You picked a strange place to bed down," he said evenly, his deep voice filling the stable. "This here's my ranch. Folks don't usually wander in uninvited." She dropped her gaze, fingers clutching at the edge of her ragged cloak. "I had nowhere else," she whispered. "Just a few hours. I'll be gone by morning." Ethan could have sent her packing. The rules of the frontier were clear. A man looked after his land and guarded it against strangers. Yet something in her, her fragility, her bone-deep weariness, or maybe the flicker of determination beneath her fear, made him hesitate. For the first time in years, Ethan McGraw's certainty wavered. Inside the ranch house, the chill of evening was held at bay by a crackling fire. Ethan set a simple meal on the wooden table, bread, beans, and a kettle of coffee. The young woman sat across from him, shoulders hunched, as if the warmth and safety of the room were things she wasn't yet sure she deserved. He noticed the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the cup. They weren't the hands of a lady raised in comfort. Her fingers bore faint rope burns, and her palms were calloused, marked by hard work and rough travel. Beneath the lantern light, a faint bruise colored the edge of her jaw, mostly hidden by shadow. "What should I call you?" Ethan asked, his voice low but steady. She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the fire before answering. "Anna," she said at last. "Just Anna. No family name, no place of origin." Ethan caught the omission but didn't press it. "Not yet. You runnin' from something?" he asked, after a long silence, his eyes narrowing slightly. Anna froze, then gave a small nod, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I can't go back to. Something I'd rather die than face again. The admission hung between them like smoke. She didn't explain further, and Ethan sensed she wouldn't, not tonight. Her fear was stitched into every word, but so was a stubborn resilience, the kind of strength born only from surviving storms most folks couldn't imagine. At that moment, Rusty, the old ranch dog, trotted in, nails clicking softly on the floorboards. He sniffed Anna's boots, then leaned his shaggy head against her knee as though he had known her all his life. A faint smile tugged at Anna's lips, the first Ethan had seen. She laid a tentative hand on the dog's fur, and Rusty gave a contented sigh. Ethan leaned back in his chair, unsettled by the sight. Rusty was a fine judge of character, more than most men in town. If he trusted her, maybe she wasn't the danger Ethan's instincts warned about. Still, Ethan couldn't quiet the questions stirring in his mind. Who was she really? What shadows followed her across the prairie? And why, for the first time in years, did the silence of his home feel less like solitude and more like company? As the firelight flickered over Anna's wary face, Ethan felt a shift deep in his chest, a pull he didn't want, yet couldn't seem to resist. The morning broke quiet and golden, the prairie grass bending gently in the wind. Ethan was already outside, checking the fences, when the faint thunder of hooves rolled across the land. He turned sharply, spotting a group of riders cresting the ridge, dust curled up behind them, the way it always did when trouble came fast and uninvited. Inside the house, Anna had just stepped onto the porch with a pail of water. The moment her eyes caught the riders, the color drained from her face, the pail slipped from her hands, clattering against the wood. "They've found me," she whispered, voice trembling. Her hands gripped the porch rail as if to steady herself. "Please, Ethan, you don't understand. If they take me back, I'll never be free. I was forced to marry a man I didn't choose. He'll never let me go." Ethan's jaw tightened. The men reined in their horses at the edge of his yard. Their leader, a sharp-faced man with polished boots and the arrogance of power, leaned forward in his saddle. "We're looking for a girl," he announced, voice carrying like a whip crack. "She belongs to Mr. Harlan. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Anna and the intruders. His eyes, cold as steel, locked onto the riders. "Don't reckon anyone belongs to another man," Ethan said flatly. "Not on my land." The leader sneered, glancing past him toward Anna. "Careful, rancher. That girl isn't your concern. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." Ethan raised the rifle just enough to make his meaning clear. "You'll ride off now, empty-handed." The silence stretched, heavy with the threat of violence. The horses shifted uneasily, sensing the tension. One of the riders spat into the dust, muttering curses under his breath. Finally, the leader jerked his reins, wheeling his horse around. "This isn't finished," he growled. "Mr. Harlan always gets what's his." With that, the men retreated, disappearing back over the ridge. Anna's knees nearly gave out. She turned to Ethan, eyes shining with a mixture of fear and gratitude. You stood for me," she breathed. Ethan lowered his rifle, but kept his gaze on the horizon. "Some things are worth standing for," he said quietly, though the weight of what he'd just invited onto his land pressed heavy in his chest. For the first time in years, Ethan's choices were no longer about himself alone. The night after the confrontation stretched long and uneasy. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the rifle still resting against the wall, his hands rough and raw from the day's work and the tension of the standoff. Across from him, Anna sat quietly, staring into the faint glow of the lantern. Her eyes held fear, but also something softer, something that unsettled him more than a dozen riders ever could. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for me," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "I don't want to be the cause of trouble on your land." Ethan leaned back in his chair, sighing. "I've never been one to bring folks close, didn't want a wife, didn't want the ties that come with one. Truth is," he paused, his throat tightening, "I was afraid of losing someone again, afraid of what it would do to me." Anna studied him, her expression gentle. "I never dreamed of marriage either. not the kind they tried to force me into. All I've ever wanted was a place where I could breathe, where someone would see me as more than property." For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the creak of the wind outside. Then Anna reached across the table. Taking his hand, she noticed the cut along his knuckles, raw from gripping the rifle too hard. Without a word, she fetched a cloth, dipping it in warm water. Carefully, she wrapped his hand, her touch tender, deliberate. Ethan's chest tightened. That small act, the quiet care, the simple acknowledgement, spoke louder than words. He realized then that solitude had never been strength, it had only been emptiness. By the time the first rays of dawn broke across the prairie, Ethan had made his choice. He turned to Anna, his voice rough but certain. "Stay," he said. "Not because I owe you, not because I pity you. Stay because I can't see this place without you anymore. Stay as my wife, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Anna's eyes, but she smiled through them, nodding. In that fragile dawn light, two lost souls found the beginning of something neither had dared to hope for. The wedding was simple, just as prairie life demanded, under the endless sky, with only a preacher, a few close neighbors, and the whisper of the wind as witness. Ethan McGraw and Anna spoke their vows. There were no grand decorations, no lavish feast, only the sincerity of two people who had found each other against all odds. The town gossiped, of course. Whispers spread quickly about the mysterious woman who appeared one night in Ethan's barn, and became his bride by morning. Yet, as days turned to weeks, admiration replaced speculation. Folks saw the change in Ethan. The once distant solitary rancher now rode into town with warmth in his eyes, and a steady calm in his stride. On the ranch, Anna found what she had long yearned for: freedom, safety, and a love she had never believed possible. She worked beside Ethan, her laughter echoing across the fields, her touch softening the edges of a life once ruled by silence. One golden morning, the couple rode out together, with the loyal ranch dog trotting alongside. As the sun rose, painting the prairie in light, Ethan realized the truth. He had not sought a wife. Fate had brought her to his barn, and into his heart.